Welcome back. Little Blinking Light Podcast is our podcast from AE Tech Design. Roger Verworn is the president at AE Tech Design. I'm Richard Pyatt. Welcome back.
Well, welcome, Richard. Thank you.
Well, this is really interesting. The notion of video surveillance. Boy, we have become video driven, haven't we? I mean, just in general, with walking around with little video cameras in our pockets, but also, the notion of security around our businesses is a really appealing idea, isn't it?
It is. You know, one of the things that we have conversations around a lot is video surveillance and how to do it efficiently and really capture the things that you're trying to capture. So it's understanding those objectives up front and really having the discussions about what video surveillance can and can't do. And there's a lot of, misnomers out there of what it can and can't do. You know, all too often we've watched the TV shows and movies where they take some video surveillance footage and they say, enhance. And before you know it, you take a really grainy, pixelated shot and you've turned it into something that you can view. And with artificial intelligence, that might be coming a little bit more to fruition. But really, if the data isn't captured in that footage, it can't create something out of nothing. And so understanding if you're trying to be able to identify people, you have to be able to have a plan for how you're going to get the shots that are going to not only have the right angle so that you can kind of capture a face profile, but have enough actual digital information to do something with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think on CSI, it's a keystroker too.
It is.
Suddenly a grainy video is clear.
You know, and it's all too common that we see that. And it's one of those cringy things. And I know every profession has that where you're like, that's not how that works. Whether you're in law enforcement or healthcare or whatever, you're sitting there going, my hospital doesn't work this way or my police department. The same thing for us. We're like, what are they doing? They're showing something that doesn't happen. And, you just shake your head and, but it's that false information that people are making their decisions based on.
So people might come to you and say, I have this grainy video in my current setup and I want the ability to enhance that. And even when you're properly designing the setup, that might not be possible.
Well, and that's where we have to talk about that. One of the things is we talk a lot about where you would capture that kind of information. So if you have a really large room and you're trying to capture that, and you might even use multiple cameras, for example, so you have a large space, it's going to be really hard to capture information to actually be able to identify things. So one of the things that we show people is at various levels of resolution, or oftentimes you hear about megapixels in cameras. The megapixels of a camera are going to determine at a certain distance how many pixels across you have of somebody's face. And how many pixels across you have of somebody's face at various levels will determine how well you could identify them. Can you identify are they male or female? Can you identify, starting to get into more and more until you would be able to actually forensically identify that this is the same person, based on that. And it even has levels of admissibility in court that people don't understand.
Wow.
And so being able to use that to identify somebody, you have to take things into consideration. And so one of the things we talk about with our clients is we call them choke points. And a choke point is somewhere that is small enough where we can get enough digital information to be able to actually identify a person. It's oftentimes in the entrance or exit corridors. And we talk a little bit about this, where we want to make sure that we have multiple camera views so that we can identify somebody coming in or out of a building before they get into a space that's too large to be able to identify everybody inside of it.
And that's mostly the point, being able to identify what you see. Just seeing movement in a camera view is generally not enough. Right?
Well, and that's one of the things that people don't realize is you may have a problem in a location in your organization. And because of that, you need to be able to identify who that was. But the problem happened in a large space where maybe you can't identify the person. But if you can then take that information and translate that, you actually have the ability to then take that and go, okay, this person was here. Where else were they in the footage? And one of the really cool things that's happening in the world of video surveillance now is with the introduction of artificial intelligence, AI can search the footage for you. So if you identify a person, you can actually say, okay, show me other shots of this person. Sometimes you're going to get people that aren't the same person. But one of the really cool things is as you begin to tell the system / artificial intelligence that this is the first shot. Okay, now here's another shot of that same person. It will narrow down and get it closer and closer to making sure it's finding all the accurate shots of a person.
Saves time.
It really does save time. The other thing we're starting to see in the video surveillance world is the ability to identify somebody based on maybe the color of their shirt. So you get a description of a situation that's happened. You can say, okay, that person was wearing a red shirt. So it will then identify everybody who's wearing a red shirt. Then you can start to narrow it down based on that to potentially gather more information about what happened. So sometimes it is about identifying, sometimes it's just about observing an overall situation so that you can combine multiple cameras to tell a story, to identify an individual, to be able to track them throughout a facility, see when they entered, seen when they exit, all of those types of things.
I promise I've been right here the whole time with my red shirt. I haven't been anywhere else. You talked about the quality of the video. That means more digital information. That means a greater amount of storage that's needed, right?
It does.
Is that a big deal anymore?
It's one of those things that when people talk about cameras and storage and things like that, there is absolutely something to making sure that you have the right amount of storage for your thing. However, as we look at systems, there are other factors that also come into play. How much activity is in your facility? Is it 24/7? Is it an airport, for example? If it's an airport, it's going to have potentially movement all the time. Right. So the amount of information is tracking because many of them will record upon some sort of movement within their frame. You're going to get a lot more storage needs that way. One of the other big things is bandwidth, or what we call throughput when it comes to cameras. Mm-hmm. How much if you have 100 or 200 cameras, not only do you have enough storage, but is your storage fast enough to actually capture from all of those cameras during a busy time simultaneously? Because if they can't capture all of the data, you're going to have problems no matter what, because then you think you have footage and it's not there, or it's broken up because the system was trying to write all of this data to the server, but it can't. And we also talk now about cloud versus on-site storage. So the idea that cameras can actually store locally to the camera, but then they can upload the footage to the cloud. There's pros and cons to that type of solution. So we talk through with clients, does it make sense to have a cloud-based solution? Does it make sense to have an on-site solution, or a hybrid of the two? And we can help navigate those types of things.
Wow. Boy, think about all that. And most of us probably haven't had that occur to us, all of those factors.
And that's one of the things where if we are able to talk with people ahead of time, we can either help them design a system, or we even do design build type scenarios where we'll design and then actually execute getting those cameras and potentially the necessary cabling installed for those cameras, the actual back end of the system, whether it's cloud-based or on-site storage, and making sure all that works and then potentially integrates with other things. One of the other really neat things that oftentimes gets overlooked is, do you have integrations between your various systems? All too often, for example, you have a card swipe at a door. Are you capturing footage of what's happening at the door every time it's card swiped? So, for example, systems are now advanced enough you can card swipe which will give identifying information about who's accessing that door. And now you can compare the footage of the person's face using facial recognition to the card swipe. And if those two don't match, guess what? It can send an alarm to somebody to take further action. So they'll take a look at the footage and just go, okay, this was for Joe. Joe was supposedly the one that swiped the card. This obviously isn't Joe that went through that door. We need to go intercept that person because they're here for a reason that they shouldn't be. And those are the types of things that we are able to do now, or be able to send out additional information. You can have your video surveillance notice that things are happening in a space that are unusual based on AI detection. So I'll give you a great example. You may have a location in your building where the traffic flows, the pedestrian traffic flows in one direction. Well, if all of a sudden the traffic is moving counter to the way that it normally moves at that time and at the normal situation, it can send an alert and go, this is unusual activity in the space. It may be completely normal and may be completely benign, but now you can actually have it so that somebody at least looks at it and goes, oh yeah, that's not a problem, or we have a situation. And that's what you want your video surveillance system doing. You want it being able to tell you that there's situations happening that are contrary to what normally happens in your environment.
And that's a smart camera in a sense.
It
That's,
is,
much smarter technology than maybe we've been used to.
Yeah, the analytics that are happening at the camera level and at the system level are incredible. And making sure that you have cameras that not only can do some of those types of things today, but whatever is invented tomorrow is important, that they have the onboard processing power in the camera, and you have the processing power of your storage solution to be able to get all of those features as they come out, because this is a very evolving landscape when it comes to video surveillance. It's not, always the most inexpensive to have in your environment. So you don't want to spend that kind of money and then find out, a year later, it doesn't have all of the things that it could because we didn't select the right solution or the right models or whatever the case may be to have that going forward.
So is there anything else that comes to mind when we say properly designed video surveillance?
I think one of the things is really just thinking through the objectives. And I talked a little bit about this at the very beginning. There's always a budget. If there wasn't a budget, you could have so many cameras that you would see everything that you wanted to in an environment. But what we do is we talk through the objective of what you're trying to accomplish with your video surveillance. And then we, at that time, are able to take that objective and then figure out, based on the budget for the project, where are the strengths and weaknesses of doing various things. So we're able to talk through, okay, we have a corridor, a 4-way corridor. How are we going to best capture that? One of the things that's happened in the industry is that there are now, it looks like a single camera. They're a little bit larger. Think of maybe a dinner plate size, but they actually have 4 cameras inside of that. So you can actually aim those 4 cameras to capture the 4-way corridor of what's happening.
Sure, if it's important for you to be able to recognize who's walking by, that could be from one of 4 directions.
Right, exactly. And being able to see them as they come from a corridor and then head out a different corridor, watching the direction of travel can be very important if there's a situation in your environment. So thinking through some of those types of things is going to be really important. It really is one of those things where we want to make sure that when people think of video surveillance and their physical technology security in an environment, that they are thinking through how does, what are my objectives and how am I going to make those happen? And we have the ability to talk through with people and ask the questions that they haven't thought about. How are they going to accomplish this in their environment with the budget that they have?
So I think every conversation we've had comes back to that, the design part of it, and understanding what the needs are, what the limitations are, the budget, and then trying to fit a solution that hits all those marks. So the design process, here we are again, it's just so important.
Well, you can plan for something, or you can fail to plan. And fail to plan usually actually winds up costing more with subpar results.
Yeah.
A lot of times people at first question why they would pay for our services. But if you talk to any of our clients who have worked with us on current or past projects, they're going to tell you that we were able to actually save them money by actually planning appropriately and designing around what they really needed, not what they thought they needed.
All right. So think about that when you're thinking about your video surveillance, and perhaps make a connection with Roger and his team at AE Tech Design to have them ask you those questions and help clarify your needs and what the solution might be. Roger, thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Roger Forwarn, AE Tech Design. I'm Richard Pyatt here on the Little Blinking Light podcast. Invite you to subscribe, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you so much.